Reimagining Progress. Lessons from the HDR Trilogy and the Road Ahead. Please welcome to the stage, Adam Levy from ClimateAdam.
Thank you all, and thank you all for joining us here today for the end, or near the end, of an incredibly busy couple of days here at the Hamburg Sustainability Conference. Often when we talk about sustainability, we actually talk about what's unsustainable. We talk about the problem, and then we talk about the solution. And in doing so, we're often focusing on the negative. By focusing on the negative, we forget to think of the world that we actually want, the world we want to build. And that's why approaches that focus on doing things differently are so incredibly valuable. They show us not just what we could do, but inspire us to do that hard work to build that world. And so today's session, I think, is a fantastic way of doing exactly that. We're looking at reports which really focus on a more beautiful, more ambitious world that we could build, the Human Development Reports. This is a flagship trilogy of reports from the United Nations Development Programme, UNDP, and they outline the challenges that we're facing today and how we could build a brighter tomorrow. So in just a second, we will have a panel discussion where we'll discuss the value of these reports and what they teach us, some of the specific lessons that come out of these reports, as well as how we might be able to implement some of those lessons. But first, we'll be joined by the director of the Human Development Report Office, Pedro Conceicao, for an exclusive teaser of the third part of the report, the 2026 Human Development Report. Pedro. Thank you, Adam.
So, I will start by referring to something that President Chinchilla said this morning. Those of you that were in the session this morning may remember a statement that President Chinchilla made to the effect that many people around the world feel insecure. And this deep sense of insecurity is something that we came across as we were analyzing data, and was something that was very unsettling to us. And that set us on a path to try to understand what might be behind this perception of insecurity. Just to put a number behind it, according to our data, 6 out of every 7 people around the world feel insecure about some aspects of their life. And this led to the identification of what we call 3 layers of uncertainty. Obviously, there are many more things happening. And each of these layers inspired us to write a human development report, starting with the 2024 Human Development Report, 2025, 2026. So that's why Adam referred to a trilogy of human development reports. So I'll speak to the findings of each of the reports before I come to the 2026 Human Development Report in the hour and a half that I have remaining. Yeah, more or less. So, 2024 Human Development Report, we focused on political polarization. And we tied these perceptions of insecurity to heightened political polarization. People that feel more insecure tend to be attracted to the extremes of the political spectrum, tend to become more entrenched in their views, tend to trust others less. And this then is behind a gridlock in cooperation both within countries as well as across countries. But there was a silver lining in the findings of our report. We found that in many of the issues around which people seem polarized, they actually agree on more than they think they do. In other words, when they are asked, for instance, if they care about climate change, over 80% of the global population say they do, but then they believe that others around them do not care as much. And just last week, the World Risk Poll, a collaboration with Ruth, that will be on the panel in a little bit, confirmed these findings. So if we find a way of sort of piercing through this pluralistic ignorance, there's an opportunity for us to ease polarization and get to some cooperation and beyond the gridlock. So 2024, polarization. 2025, we looked at artificial intelligence. And I guess the two key ideas that we wanted to put forward is that artificial intelligence is not something that happens to us. It's not like a law of nature or an asteroid that is coming at us. It's something that we are shaping, that we are creating. And what we do with it is a matter of choice. And we also advocating for looking at AI in ways that complements people and is not seen as something that replaces people. 2026 Human Development Report, which will be launched towards the end of this year. So the third element of these layers of uncertainty, so polarization, artificial intelligence, has to do with a planet that is changing very rapidly. I don't know, how many of you were here on Sunday or Saturday? So you saw the temperatures. I went to have a coffee before I came to a meeting on Sunday here to prepare the conference. And the person that was at the cafe told me that in 50 years, she had never seen this temperature in Hamburg. But you know, this has having tragic consequences. I saw an estimate today that the high temperatures in France have caused 1,000 of excess deaths. So that's beyond those that were predicted. So this planetary change manifested in increase in temperature is something that is becoming obviously very, very present. But what we are seeing or trying to do with the 2026 Human Development Report is not to focus on climate only. That's why I use this expression, planetary change. And we are trying to see or to frame climate as sort of a special problem of a broader set of challenges that have to do with the way in which our economic activities are putting pressure on the planet, are eroding the ability of the biosphere to do many things that are important to us and to other forms of life on Earth. One of which is maintaining the stability of the climate or maintaining the ozone layer. But this is, in a sense, special problems because you can attribute very directly the people or entities that are causing the problem by emitting greenhouse gases. And I think that when we look at the biosphere or the natural world, it's often much more complicated to attribute this kind of responsibility and therefore to identify the solutions. And on the panel, we will have Dirk and David that will speak much more eloquently to this point. In fact, there was recently an economist, perhaps the most prominent economist looking at biodiversity, that published a report called Economics of Biodiversity. And the conclusion of all of this report, all of this analysis, was that, in his view, we needed to instill in people an affection for nature and its processes. That's how Partha Dasgupta concluded the so-called Dasgupta Review. So with the 2026 Human Development Report, of which we're going to give you a preview, you can access a preview on this access code. We're going to do many things, but I will just mention two. One is to try to see if we can conceptualize something that relates and connects to this notion of an affection for nature, the way in which people interact with nature, relate to nature. And not only conceptualize it, but if we can quantify it and measure and account for it. So we aim at reducing something that we're calling a nature relationship index. And the second thing we're trying to do is to propose an index of the hazards associated with planetary change that includes not only temperature, which obviously is something that captured our attention being in Hamburg over the last few days, but you know, temperature increase is only of the many hazards that are affecting communities around the world. You have sea level rise, you have droughts, you have floods. And sometimes these things overlap. You may remember the floods in Pakistan not too long ago. Well, those regions that were flooded today are suffering from drought and extreme temperature. So we are trying to come up with an index that compounds a number of hazards and provides information to policymakers, to firms, to decision makers in different roles about these compounding hazards. So I'll just conclude by saying that our intention is not only to speak about the trilogy that is coming to the end with the 2026 Human Development Report, but also to get your feedback and insights from the panel about what we should be looking after as we look forward. So what should be the next trilogy of Human Development Reports? Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pedro. That's a fantastic way of starting our session. And I'd now like to invite our panelists onto the stage. So starting with Laura Chinchilla, former president of Costa Rica and the chair of the HDR Advisory Board. So, Laura. We also have Ruth Boumphrey, CEO of Lloyd's Register Foundation. David Obura, who is the chair of the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. And finally, we have Dirk Messner, president of the German Environment Agency. Thank you. Oh, I'll take this chair. I'm sorry, Dirk.
Sorry?
Sorry, I need to take this chair. I'm so sorry.
I can moderate also.
No, it's okay. There's always an element of musical chairs with these things. But this is perfect. You're sat right next to me because I'd like to start with you, Laura. I think it's no surprise to anyone in the audience here today that we're living through turbulent times. And we're experiencing that on the individual level, right up to the institution, even the international levels. What are the symptoms we're seeing of that? How are we seeing individuals, how are we seeing societies struggling to cope with the times that we're in?
Well, thank you very much for this important panel. And I need to apologize because I have abuse on my presence in the different stages today. So many of you must be tired of listening to me. But I promise to be very punctual about my comments. But also let me say something. I have the honor to be a member of the advisory board of the Human Development Report. But before that, I was part of the fan club of the Human Development Report. So I encourage you to read, especially the last reports, because you will find not only new metrics, which help us to better measure the different elements of human development, but many innovations in terms of the concept of human development and that kind of discussion. So I recommend you to read the 3 reports that Pedro presented just now. I will say that from the point of view of the governance framework, what we are seeing is something that we have been repeating across the different events today, and that is that we are experiencing challenges of a global magnitude, some of them with important and significant implications on human development, while at the same time, the system is not being able to respond. This is because the fragmentation and especially because of the polarization. So at the international level, that is the situation. But when we go down to the national level, the same thing or something similar is happening. Polarization is fragmenting societies, so dialogue is becoming very, very difficult. And so there is this gridlock that our reports describe very well, which impede us to move forward. So this explains what also Pedro mentioned, and I mentioned early in the morning, that the people is feeling like if they are not having control anymore of the most important concerning issues in terms of their own lives. So this feeling of not being in control is impacting negatively on the agency of people. So this is a dynamic that we need to do something about, because this dynamic is interplaying and creating a scenario that is not positive in terms of advancing the kind of policies and the kind of decisions that we need to take from the political side. So basically, that's what I will say in terms of the governance concerns and implications of what the reports have been presenting.
And you mentioned this sense of lack of control. I'm really interested, actually, for everyone present here today, perhaps you could raise your hands, who here feels they have control in their own lives. I feel like I do, in some ways at least. Yeah, some hands. Who here feels like they have control in some sense over their leaders, over their democratic institutions, who are making decisions about their own lives? Not so many of us. And actually, even fewer than the reports show. I think the reports show 50%, roughly, feel in control of their own lives, and 2/3 feel they don't have agency over government decisions. Now, Ruth, people are understandably increasingly worried. When we look at what people are worried about, what are the topics that globally come up again and again?
Okay, so thank you so much. And thank you, Pedro, for just talking about the World Risk Poll, which we're publishing at the moment. So my charity is focused on safety. And safety is important because in order to be a good human being, under the psychological Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you need to feel safe and you need to be safe, right? So we think that's a very important aim to have. And if something's not safe, it's not sustainable. So it's a fundamental principle of sustainability. Now, when we looked at the map about 10 years ago to say, okay, where are people not safe? The map was half blank because we just didn't have the data about how people lived their lives or even that they were alive. The data that records human beings as human beings just was not there. So we partnered with Gallup to commission this World Risk Poll, which covers 95% of the global population, 140 different countries. And we ask people about their everyday experience of harm. We ask them about their perceptions of harm. And we also ask them about aspects of their daily life that can keep them safe, like their resilience. So coming to the question that you've asked, so what do people experience? And what do they worry about? Well, they worry about, top of mind, things like road traffic accidents and crime and violence. But in amongst the questions that we ask, we also ask them about things like climate change. And for the first time this year, we reached 75% of people think that climate change is a risk to them and their country. 75%, that's 3 out of 4. Now, we also asked this year, okay, so you think climate change is a risk. How many other people in your country do you think? Do you think that they're concerned? And what we found is a massive gap, especially in wealthy countries, a massive gap between people who are concerned about climate change and what they think the rest of their fellow citizens think. That gap is the highest in America and Portugal. I don't know about Portugal, but I can see why that gap exists in America, but it exists in wealthy countries especially. So that disconnect is a policy opportunity because what we think other people are thinking affects how we behave. We've also heard that in Germany, the politicians are even further away from knowing what people think. So, you know, if you think, I know what you think, does the politician know what we think? What it brings out is the real importance of listening to people and their lived experience. And what I would also say, so that's about perception, but about experience. The experience of people being hurt by extreme weather events is going up. And at the moment it's 18%. So nearly 1 in 5 people have been hurt by an extreme weather event. And that is very closely linked then to their perceptions about climate.
And I'm very curious about this statistic, specifically about governments, because you would think it would naturally be in a politician's interest to know what their voters are thinking. Do we have a sense of why this gap is so big between political perceptions of the general population and what people are actually thinking?
We fund a lot of research around this, so there's a huge body of knowledge out there. But one of the things that strikes me is about this polarization question. So if you're a politician, you're being, it's not just the algorithms, but actually the lobbyists as well that are coming to you. And lobbyists want you to think one way or the other. They want you to act in a certain way. That effect, I imagine, is the most extreme as a politician, but I imagine it softens as you get into the general population. So the way that politicians may see the world is affected in a different way, with different types of algorithm from the rest of us.
Thank you. Laura, just turning back to you for a moment, I'd be really curious to know, within this context, we're really painting a bit of a negative picture, but then where do these reports come in? Because these reports, in many ways, are very hopeful and very optimistic. What's the motivation behind that kind of messaging within this, I suppose, troubling context that we're currently looking at?
Well, as Pedro said, the important thing is to understand that we have the capacity, the possibilities to change these negative cycles and to break the gridlock. By, for example, number one, investing in the right kind of services so we can expand people's capacities and possibilities. When we, for example, analyze the situation with the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, it was very clear that those societies that had previously invested in good health systems did it and managed in a better way than the other ones. Or the other issue is protecting, not only investing to prevent, but also protecting the people in that sense. And let me give you another example. We have been discussing about the role of a single policy, which is the minimum universal salary, something that it is even more important now with the displacement that will occur with the implementation of AI in many sectors. And so this is the kind of policies that you can implement. But again, the problem right now, I mean, from the point of view of the policy decision-making processes, is that it is being very difficult to advance because of this polarization. And so that also means that we need to do something with the narrative. And that brings us to the role of digital technologies. Because we had already published previously another report on digital technologies. AI is a different report, but the AI can accelerate even more the polarization in the conversations among people.
Would anyone like to comment specifically on digital technologies?
Yeah, so I can come in with some of the data from the World Risk Poll, because one of the first questions, our early questions, was, do you think AI will mostly hurt, mostly harm, or mostly benefit your country? And in that global poll, the people who thought it would mostly benefit their country is 10 points higher than those who thought it would mostly harm their country. So there's a larger degree of confidence. But if you look at the global map, that's very much concentrated in East Asia and in the countries which generate the AI. When you unpick that, if you unpick the data, people who feel they are discriminated against in their daily lives are most likely to mistrust the technological developments. So there's opportunities, policy opportunities, to target, and to bring on board people who might be left behind, so that they can see the benefits of the technology. And we've seen great technological transformation happen, and benefits, especially from mobile telephony and being able to have things in your hand. So there's a huge opportunity there.
There's such a wealth of information in these reports, and I think the narrative arc of these reports is so valuable. But beyond that, the reports are written in a way which is, they have, of course, an academic foundation, but they're written in very plain language. And I'm curious, Dirk, what's the motivation and what's the impact of writing reports in such accessible language? How have we seen that influence the impact the reports can have?
It is accessible knowledge, but they go very deep and are very profound. So my first point goes to you, Pedro. I really enjoyed reading this Trilogy, and I think that you advanced really the discussion about the major drivers of change, which is driving us in the political situation globally, Laura, you reflected upon in the morning. No? And Pedro, when we started to work together, my takeaway from the trilogy is, no? When we started to cooperate, we thought that the biggest transformation in our life, in our generation, maybe the next two to come, would be the planetary issues, which you are now going to finish with. No? And this remains absolutely important. But with the other two reports, you are highlighting other tectonic and deep shifts of global change, which we need to take on board now, which we haven't seen in the 2015 SDG agenda. No? The first one is the AI dimension, which you spoke about in the morning so eloquently. So this is impacting everything, no? Impacting democracy, impacting our education systems, our democratic systems, how public is interacting. So this is a fundamental driver of change. We need to understand how it works and how to embed it, how to shape it. No? And then, Pedro, you are arguing that we have political dimensions, which are also completely different now from 10 years ago. The first one is deep democratic crisis in the advanced economies now, where we saw that this issue, democracy in Europe, for example, is solved. Now we see it's not. No? So the third tectonic shift is democratic crisis across the globe, but even in countries where we thought political stability is a given. No? And the fourth dimension, which I'm seeing in your first report also, is that Laura, no? International cooperation. I mean, we move towards global identities, global governance, global civilization, domestic global policies, Willy Brandt. No? You are now moving into this direction, but we are moving backwards. No? And now it's again about our countries first, my country first. So this is pre-1945 thinking. No? And this is another forced tectonic shift. And when I read this, I thought, what could this mean for our European agenda? So how would our homework look like if I follow your trends? No? And I will only give three quick headlines for that. Now, the first is that, I mean, with the European Green Deal, we tried to formulate one of the most ambitious green economy approaches, and we are now fighting hard to get it stabilized. No? So getting the European Green Deal stabilized needs to be our contribution to the planetary issues, and it's not for sure that we can do. No? The second issue which came up to my mind is that the democracy issue. I mean, what we see in our data is that what people concerns most in Germany and parts of Europe is that on the first three priorities is education systems are eroding. Health systems are eroding. This is a perception of people, no? And domestic security, still not a given in Germany and other parts of Europe, no? We thought that in the past, 10 years ago, that these are issues which developing countries need to answer, but now we see that our people feel insecure because these issues are not being solved, no? So to get solutions for that, in Europe, the whole question about education, health, and domestic security needs to be solved, because if we don't do that, we will not get the planetary issues done. And last point, this is your issue, Laura, and I count on you, with the South-North Commission, because, I mean, what I'm seeing in Europe is we are investing now a lot of money in military infrastructure. And I must say, I even agree on it. No? Maybe not the amounts which we are really investing. 5% is huge of our GDP into military infrastructure. But there is Trump on the one hand side, there is Putin on the other hand side, there is an issue. No? But in all the other fields of international cooperation of our countries in Europe, development cooperation, cultural cooperation, humanitarian aid, science cooperation, cooperation between cities, youth cooperation, whatever you look at, we are cutting our budgets down. And I mean, we will not get the international cooperation crisis solved when we cut our budgets down in all these fields. No? I think we needed to fight for, I call this a factor 2 to 3 strategy when it comes to international cooperation. We needed to to let it grow by factor 2 to 3 to get the global interdependencies right, which we are confronted with. No?
And this sense of cooperation, this sense of cooperation, this sense of divide that we experience, it permeates so many different aspects of society. We're seeing that there's a sense of division between us and decision makers, between different nations. But also fundamentally, there's a sense of division and divide where we talk about the human world and the natural world as if they're somehow distinct. And David, I'm curious how we can begin to turn that on its head, how we can try and transform that so we see our lives, our world, as fundamentally interlinked, intertwined with the natural world.
Thanks, Adam. So that's a tough question to answer. I suppose the background to my answer will be that I'm chairing the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. And what that means is that people have thought of us, and we've been perceived as the UN Biodiversity Panel. But that's not at all what we do. We look at biodiversity and how it supports people. So it's really about the nature as the foundation for economies and society. We have a very polycultural, multicultural perspective, looking at multiple knowledge systems, and many indigenous societies and small communities are very integrated with nature. They've never separated themselves out from nature because they see themselves as very much part of it. But in our modern world, in our capital-intensive world, you can call it capitalist, but that means that we just sort of convert capital from nature, and we're hungry to convert it into economic goods and services that we can buy and sell in markets. We've done this in such a way that we have separated ourselves from nature, and people no longer realize that in going to the supermarket and buying their food or paying for the water that comes in a pipe, we're actually living like our species does. That's our basic material needs. We implement it through markets now and through money. So that separation has become extremely high. And so the frameworks that we have in IPBES is, as chair of the platform, in a way, I've had the time to look at the frameworks and look across the assessments we have that are really very much about interlinkages, really understanding how do we connect these things together. And that's very much what, and it wasn't planned either, become involved with the Nature Relationship Index that is in the new HDR report coming out this year. And the way that's framed is really looking at this connection between people and nature in three elements. One is that nature is thriving and that we can access it in the space around us. That's really necessary for connecting with nature for people. That's really about the state of nature and its place around us. The second element is that nature is used with care. So sustainable use, the things that we need and the things that we eat, and we, as a species, we do need to consume things from nature. We can't get away from that. That's the second part. And then the third part is about nature is safeguarded, is the way that we've framed it. It's in our legislation and in our laws. But that is, in a broader sense, thinking about it over the last sort of 6 or 8 months, I've really seen that as being this element of the reciprocity and care for nature that, again, many cultures have, but we have forgotten about that in our modern cultures. We think it's there for us to just use and extract. And sure, we'll look after it and we'll sort of put it in protected areas and it's guarded over there. But it's really caring for nature and the reciprocity of, I take something, so I respect nature as well. I ask permission to use that. I don't use too much and so on. So really re-establishing that sense of connection with nature is really important to try and build. How do we do that? It's really hard to get from where we are now in our global economic system to that place. And one of the things that it comes up in so many different areas now, and I'm seeing it as very much a matter of values. So we did a values assessment in IPBES, and that's a very social science-y assessment that was done. And when I initially looked at that, before I became very closely involved, I wondered, why did we identify that to do? How do you do an assessment on values of nature? But it's an amazing report because it really shows that the values we have drive the system that we implement. So whether it's AI, is AI going to be good or harmful for various things, or our global economic system, if the the transformative change assessment said one of the values is that drives our current system is disconnection of people from nature and tendencies to dominate over nature and other people. If we just take the reverse of that, to have the rule being to care for nature and to look after it and make sure that we're nurturing it, if that's the value system that we have, we will drive our economic systems in very different ways, not just to make profit, but to ensure that the system is sustainable and is nurtured and can regrow.
I will like to add one example, which is very close to me, and that is my country, Costa Rica, because this special relationship that David is explaining, which is part of our last report, the report that Pedro refers to, and I mean, it's aspiring basically to get a better balanced relationship between the nature and human development. In fact, I mean, nature is part of human development. So the new metric, what pretends to measure or to add to the traditional indicators of human development is one more dimension. And if you look at some nations, once that you add this new metric, those countries are able to go up in the different kind of measurements. So Costa Rica achieved precisely this. Although we confronted many discussions some years ago about, for example, if we were sacrificing our economic growth in terms of protecting the environment, on the other hand. But our own development demonstrated that we were able to bring both things together at the same time. I mean, bringing a sustainable development, but also bringing economic opportunities to our people. And that is possible at the end, as the report says, it is about our own choices. Unfortunately, most of the choices are political choices, and politics today is failing.
And I mean, one of the fundamental choices is, as you mentioned, the metrics we choose to use to evaluate whether society is doing well or not. And for a long time, we've used metrics like GDP. I'm curious, David, are we seeing other countries shift in the way that Costa Rica has maybe shifted in terms of how they evaluate their own successes? And I mean, I understand that's something the reports are really putting forward.
Yes, so I think there are huge advances that are being made. I think GDP still dominates everything in terms of how a country evaluates itself against other countries and in the financial markets and so on. And that's linked to how companies measure themselves, which is their balance sheets about money. But there are more metrics coming in about nature, about other aspects of the economic capital that are in countries and companies, and then also about the health and human relationships and so on. There's a lot of experimentation around that, and I think the Human Development Index is one of the first to do that, to become very established. We're exploring this with the Nature Relationship Index in the HDR report now. It'll take some time, but I think it's really important that we understand the framing of all this experimentation that is happening, because we won't know ahead of time which are the best metrics, but by different countries trying different things, and the well-being economies that are really kicking off in some countries, the very strong national priorities, we'll find solutions over the coming years. But we need to hold the space very strongly, and I think it's really important that we emphasize that nature must be healthy, our economies need to be healthy, not overgrown, but healthy, and society needs to be healthy as well. And those three basic buckets need to work together.
I'm going to turn to you, Dirk, for a very easy question, which is, how do we begin to take these valuable words, these valuable lessons from these reports, and turn those into meaningful action? You know, it's great to have these reports as a guide, but how do we take that further? And of course, we've touched on that already, but I'd love to hear you expand on the thoughts that we've shared today.
I mean, I think it's very important, and therefore I congratulated you with your trilogy, no? Trying to understand where the drivers of fundamental change are. No? Because we had several discussions here during the Hamburg Sustainability Conference talking about post-2030. No? And one impulse, of course, looking at all these discussions, we were in the same room, no? Looking at all these discussions from a political strategic perspective, end up with the argument that we should not touch anything, because if we open it up, this kind of debate, we might end up with nothing. No? Probably, Laura, in the South-North Commission, you are going to discuss these kind of questions also. But what you are showing with your trilogy, with your reports, is that if we ignore these fundamental drivers, we are ending up nowhere. We need to understand these changes and try to find answers to that. And I tried in my first intervention to show how from a European perspective, you can nail this down, operationalize this to very concrete things. No? And this is why I found this report so valuable at the end of the day. I would like to add one thought about humans and nature and the social dimension of the sustainability transformation. The data in Germany and Europe are showing us that even though we have wars around us now, and even though that many people feel insecure, still 80 to 90% of Germans and also Europeans are arguing for this transformation towards climate neutrality, European Green Deal, sustainability transformation. So it's not a polarized issue, which is very important to emphasize. No? But 40%, no? 40% of the population is arguing that they are also convinced that the transformation will erode and threaten their social and economic status. And this is a very hard indicator that if we don't get the social dimension right, we will also fail immediately on the planetary scale issues, right?
And I think overcoming this inertia is incredibly important. And Ruth, we have time for a very quick word on these kinds of interventions.
I just wanted to pick up on the what to do and what's the big picture here, because infrastructure is needed, right? We need to have infrastructure, and there was an interesting study that showed that the weight of built things has already exceeded the weight of natural things on the planet, some big picture things, and it's accelerating fast. Now, the infrastructure is mostly going to be needed across the African continent, because that's where the population and the demand for infrastructure is going to be mostly held. One of the things, then, there's an intervention point here. There's an intervention point that as we build out new infrastructure, we can do that in a nature-sensitive way. And the World Economic Forum, a couple of weeks ago, published their economic indicators on this and saw it as a $10 trillion opportunity, a $10 trillion growth opportunity. So I think the perceptions that people have that nature will cost me is completely different from actually what the opportunity is.
Oh, finished right on the buzzer. That was incredibly impressive.
Perfect timing.
I wasn't expecting you to hit the note quite so perfectly, but thank you all so much. I mean, there's such a wealth of information in these reports, in the first two reports and in the third report, which is upcoming. And I mean, you've all done, as well as Pedro, have done a fantastic job of giving a sense of what the reports have to offer. I really, really encourage everyone here in the audience to check out the reports. You can use the QR link here, or you can head directly to hdr.undp.org, where you can check out the first two reports, and you can also check out a preview of some of the lessons that is contained in the third report, the 2026 Human Development Report. And I really find these reports so valuable, not just because they outline so many of the problems we've spoken about today, but because they do so much work to shift the narrative around what we could do, about what world we could live in the future. And for me, that encapsulates a lot of what this entire conference has been about. And so from my perspective, this is a fantastic way to almost draw the conference to a close. And it's been a pleasure to speak with all of you. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you.